Welcome to the Human First podcast with me, Adrian Murphy. Today I'm here with Jamie Livingston of Livingston James. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for inviting me on, Adrian.
It's a pleasure. So hopefully, as you probably guessed, and for those who have not listened to the podcast yet, we're really interested in people's stories, having great conversations with interesting people. We want to learn a wee bit about the business, and I think there's some interesting stuff in there in terms of how it could be a kind of indicator of where things are currently at. But also we're really interested in you. We want to know your story, how you got to where you are. I'm sure somewhere along the way there've been the odd misstep, but some of those successes, failures, and hopefully we leave the audience with a better understanding of you, but also they've learned something along the way as well. Does that sound all right?
I'll do my best.
Yeah, thank you. So probably best just starting at the beginning. Tell us a wee bit about your story and bringing us up to where we are.
We're going right back to the beginning because it does kind of come full circle in relevance. I was adopted when I was 2 weeks old by the most incredible parents, and I've had the most wonderful and privileged opportunities through life as a consequence. And it's been increasingly made me aware over time of the importance of being in the right place.
Yeah.
And so, moving into recruitment, which didn't happen immediately after being adopted, but eventually one of the drivers there was about getting the right people in the right place to thrive. So it's kind of ingrained through me, through life experience, just in terms of how important it is to be around the right people.
Right. Wow. Okay. And so how did you end up in recruitment? What were you doing prior to that? Or I take it wasn't a straight line.
No, I probably had delusions of grandeur around rugby when I was younger.
Yeah.
But my lack of talent started to really shine through as I got older. But that was probably, if you asked me when I was at school, that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then maybe like a lot of people had the notion that I would always like to have my own business, but I wasn't really clear at what that would be. So I kind of went to university to tread water, still playing rugby, and enjoying myself with no
clinging
idea.
on to that dream.
Clinging on to that dream, exactly. And then it became clear from what I could find out that understanding people, regardless of what business I was going to go into, was going to be important. And when I started to explore what I thought I was maybe naturally good at, hopefully building relationships, understanding people, influencing, and then I looked at, well, what are the career paths that I could go into as a starter for 10 where that's the entry-level requirement. My parents were keen that I perhaps became an accountant or a lawyer, and I was thinking, well, that sounds like more studying again. And I'm not sure I was ever going to be the best accountant or lawyer. So I kind of found recruitment probably in the first instance thinking, well, that'll be a good thing to understand regardless of what business I might go on to do.
Sure. Yeah.
And loved it. Really enjoyed it. I worked for Hayes in the very early parts of my career, and then I joined Michael Page. Had the opportunity to do a startup for Michael Page in Ireland, which was a great kind of dress rehearsal for doing it myself. For family reasons, we needed to move back from Dublin. So I found myself in I didn't think I realised how precarious a position it was. Commuting to Dublin, financial crash hitting, hints of, would you move to London, would you move to Dublin? And I was going to go, no. So I found myself with my wife Chloe not working. Our wee boy Robbie at the time I think was about 9 months old, and I was taken into an office and told that I didn't have a job anymore.
Wow.
So that was a great opportunity to start my own business.
I love the positive outlook.
Well, I think necessity is a great catalyst. And I was talking to a friend actually at the weekend who was brave enough to choose to resign and set up his own business.
Okay.
And I was saying to him, I don't know that I ever would have been brave enough to do that. So it was a blessing in disguise. Not that it really felt like that as I was walking home and phoning Chloe to say I don't have a job. But
that's a tricky conversation.
It was, but she was incredibly supportive and has confided, long after the event that she was really quite anxious about this harebrained idea to start a business rather than get a job. But I had that nice push. And as I think having had the privilege to interview a lot of people doing what I do over my career, it's very often these things that at the time feel like they're a massive setback that prove the catalyst to go on to be really your biggest successes. And that was certainly the case there.
So what were some of the challenges you faced then when you were first setting up, other than the fact you didn't have a job?
Well, sitting watching a really small amount of money in a bank account reduce was a challenge. And I was very fortunate to be connected. There was a period of time where I was having a little bit of a debate with my previous employer about how the restrictive covenants would work,
of course,
etc. And during that period, I'd kind of registered the company at Companies House, done some of the back office stuff. And while I was still really debating that, I was connected to a chap, Andy Rogerson, who, at that point had quite a lot more experience than I had done, had left a much bigger job in London to come and set up in Scotland. Okay. And I think at that point we decided we would go into business together, marketing ourselves as an ideal blend of youth and experience. And as I got older, we just ditched the youth experience. An ideal blend of experience. And what was certainly very helpful was when Andy and I made the decision to hire our first person. When the appropriate pressure started coming, well, we need to pay her first.
Yeah.
And so we need to get on and do some good work for our clients that we're going to get paid for. Yep. So, probably it felt like a challenge, but one we needed to sort of put ourselves under. Otherwise, we might never have got out of the pub, I think is possibly my recollection of how things work. Exactly. So, and I guess then, the usual challenges that business face, looking at cash, being able to pay people. Recruitment's it's got a low cost of entry to get in, but as soon as you start hiring people, it burns a lot of cash. And having both of us had been kind of schooled in the PLC environment, so we understood a P&L well. We came to understand cash really well, really quickly through a couple of near misses. Then apparently there's a thing called a balance sheet that's quite important when you then want to go and try and borrow money. Because we were keen, and I'm really glad we stuck to our guns. We kind of became quite attractive to some really great people, but we didn't really have the cash to be able to bring them all in at once. So we kind of did our kind of relatively amateur cash flow forecast and went, well, we can do this with cash. But when we went to any bank, they were saying, well, actually, and we went to a number of banks who liked the conversation, but ultimately all for the same reason said, well, no, your balance sheet will be insolvent. You really need equity if you want to fill that. So once, we understood that was reality, we kind of said, well, no, we don't want to do that. And we kind of stuck to just generating the profit and the cash. And then once we became appropriately profitable, we went back to the bank that said no quickest, because a lot of them we spoke to for a long time, and then they said no for the same reasons and said, this is what we want to do. And they put in a really innovative solution for us to be able to draw down cash when we were hiring. Okay. And that allowed us then to accelerate the growth at that point. So
that seems like quite an important learning point for anyone, and because we have some founders on here and stuff like that. Cash is king. That's it. I know it's such a well-trodden kind of quote, but it really is. Profits, turnover, these things can all be made to look good on paper, but if you don't have cash, then you're stuffed.
Absolutely.
And did that mean you had to slow down a wee bit, in the sense you couldn't maybe accelerate the business forward, make the hires, etc., because of that?
Yes. Well, it slowed down first because we realised we didn't want to dilute with equity. And then this deal that was put in place was quite neat. Like, we were only paying for the money that we borrowed per hire, which was kind of in our heads made a lot more sense than borrowing all the money and then not knowing if we were going to be able to hire. So it was a neat solution for us, and we were able to hire a bit more quickly with that sort of facility in place. But yes, I think we were learning that you kind of you can't have your cake and eat it. If you want to hold on to the equity, it's going to be a slower growth.
Yep.
But that kept control in our hands, and I think that was very helpful.
Coming from then, and obviously having to work really hard, keep an eye on every penny. Where have you got to today? Then, has the business obviously flourished?
The business has flourished. I mean, we've been through our ups and downs for sure, like every business. We launched as an executive search business, Livingston James, which we still absolutely are, at doing board and head of function exec search. And what we found probably 2.5 years in was we'd placed a lot of CFOs and finance directors, which is great. And then, as can happen, they would say, well, actually, I want to change the financial controller, or I need a tax manager or something like that. We were delighted to help. And a lot of our sort of the bigger clients that we worked with, so that Heineken, Weir Group, Standard Life, they were using us to do search work for senior finance positions. They were using London-based search firms to do chief exec and major C-suite. Yeah. And we were delighted to do the work, and we were delighted for it to be known that we were working with that caliber of business. But we were starting to develop a reputation as a finance recruiter rather than an exec search business.
Right, okay.
And the core market for Livingston James really is Scottish SME, where we would appoint the chief exec, the HR director, the finance director, and we were becoming known as a finance recruiter. So we thought, well, that's nice, but could we do both? So what was really an experiment for us at that stage was we spun the finance practice out and rebranded it as Rutherford Cross. And that allowed us to, focus all the marketing efforts of that brand on the accountancy world, whilst maintaining the sort of brand proposition we needed for Livingston James. And that worked really very well for us, and still does. We of course thought we'd found the magic sauce and tried to create, and we think we had more brands than people at one point as we tried to roll this out across every function that a business might have, and that didn't work. But I tell you, the process of naming a brand, going through all the creative work, it's like naming a child. And we had some really good people come and join us. But what we worked out, we maybe had at one point 5 different brands, and we maybe only had less than 20 people in the business.
Right. Okay.
So the amount of time spent on marketing conversations was disproportionate to what the return was coming. So over a period of time, but it was hard because you build these things and it feels like you're, and probably at that point, Andy and I, generally speaking, I hope that I'm generally more carrot than stick, but then when I use stick, and it needs to be effective, and Andy would probably be more stick and more and when he produces a carrot for somebody, that was very effective. But we were starting to cancel each other out. So when I'd go, no, we need to close this now, he'd be going, no, we need to give them another shot. And so it was becoming hard to make decisions. So we ultimately sort of changed the ownership structure, and then it allowed some of those decisions to be made more quickly.
Right. Okay. So tell us a wee bit about yourself then. So we understand about the business. You shared earlier that you were adopted. What was your kind of early life? You were into rugby. Was there anything from then that you think was interested in, how you became the fully formed person that you are today, and some of those influences?
Eating a lot.
That's a rugby player in you.
I still eat like I did when I was playing, but I'm not training so hard yet.
So what were some of those influences that helped you to get you to where you are today?
Sure. Well, my parents were both huge influences on me. From a career perspective, my dad was a surveyor, so service industry, and was always involved along with his career in various other things. So he was ultimately convener of court at Strathclyde University. He was secretary at West of Scotland Rugby Club. And he sort of instilled a sense of service and duty. I think that I probably didn't notice him doing it, and I'm not sure he did anything other than lead by example, and just the sort of man that he was. And my mum, was stay-at-home mum principally, but then as we got older, she had her own catering business, and she she's incredibly resilient. So I think learned resilience from mum and service from dad. So they were both huge influences on me. And then my uncle Douglas was captain at West, which was our kind of family rugby club. And I was explaining how I would stand outside the dressing rooms and hear him give his team talks, which increased my vocabulary without improving it significantly as a young boy. So the sort of wider family influence. Very strong, and when I was 13, I went to boarding school. Lots of great friends, and in fact, my headmaster for most of my time there, Norman Drummond, has been a huge influence. He founded a charity, Columba 1400, that I'm now privileged to be co-chair of.
Right, okay.
So he did suspend me from school, which I have reminded him of. So our relationship was good enough to stand suspension. So I had some really good role models. It was just a test, yeah. So there was fortunate to have some really great role models when I was growing up.
That's fantastic. It's obviously helped you in getting to where you are today. And I guess along the way, you've touched on some of them, but what were the biggest challenges you had, whether it was starting a business or anything else? What kind of comes to mind for you?
I can remember going business first, that we made a big decision to move into really nice offices that were still in Glasgow. And given our relative size then, I think we maybe only had 4 or 5 people in Glasgow, and the office that we're still in, it can easily have 25 people in it. So it was quite a big cost for us. And I remember taking, and this gets played back to me quite often now, but I remember taking the team as we were at that time, and I said, guys, we can have another performance like that next month, and we'll keep the lights on, and we could possibly do that another month again. But if it happens for a third month, we're all going to be looking for another job. And I think that not long having made what I hope was quite a sort of inspiring speech to them, I was heading off on holiday to France, and there was a deal that I was very sure that I was going to land that would tide us over. And I spoke to this particular candidate. We were driving to France, and I sort of stopped at one of the roadside service stations, and the candidate said, do you know what? I think I'm going to accept it. I know you're going to be in France. I don't know what your reception will be like. I'll just text you to confirm on Monday. So I thought, job done. Enjoyed the first 2 days of my holiday until I got the text message saying, I'm really sorry, I'm not going. And it was, at the time, it would have been one of our biggest deals that we would have done, and it would have given us enough cash to be comfortable for at least another month. So that holiday wasn't much fun.
No. That's a really interesting one, though, because I think we've all probably experienced that at some point, and it's how you, I guess it's how, what do you learn from, but how did you overcome it's not just disappointment. None of us like to lose out on a big client or something like that, but that was really quite important as well for other reasons. How did you deal with that?
It probably is I generally don't like losing as a rule of thumb. That's the one that stuck with me as probably the worst, because I felt that it felt a real level of responsibility personally to bring in that cash, because that was going to be able to keep good people in their jobs. What actually happened in that situation was the team essentially bailed me out, as they have done on more than one occasion. So I guess I felt pretty down in the dumps, and I guess you just get up and you get on with the next thing. There was nothing really to be done to turn that particular deal around, unfortunately. But the team came through, and probably it may have been their equivalent of when Andy and I hired our first person. Go, oh gosh, we really need to get focusing on this now. I think maybe that situation was the catalyst to go, okay, this is a nice place to work and it's great fun, but we need to get on and be really good at what we do. So I'd love to say I fixed it, but the team did. which is great. I mean, it's so important. Do you find that? I mean, you guys, it's your name above the door and all that stuff, but you can't do it alone. No.
Right? And actually, the thing that we, always recognise is that you grow the people, you grow the business. It's not like you grow the business and the people just kind of get dragged along with it.
Absolutely, and particularly what in recruitment, the sort of the talent and the assets, if you like, of the business walk in and out of the door every day.
Yeah. We all have our own personal ambitions. They'll be linked to in some way to money. That dirty subject that nobody likes to talk about. But how does that work with being successful and all the things that come with that? How do you manage that balance?
I think that I do agree. Sometimes people can look at money as a dirty thing, and
a bad habit we've got in this country, I think.
And I think I had a really interesting week. This was last year. I was involved in a program with EY and ended up down in London, meeting some really, really interesting and incredibly successful people. There was a bit of a caricature. It was almost, as you were introduced, the question was, how much money have you got and how successful you are? And I kind of thought, gosh, I can see some of the caricature of greed. And then in the same week, I was back up at a conference for charity chief execs, and part of it, we were in breakout groups and we were talking about money. And I was saying, well, what about more private sector partnership, and there was a harsh reaction to that. And I was kind of going, well, I know, and I was thinking, well, the money has to come from somewhere, and I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. I mean, there's definitely, as I observe our clients, I think an increasing convergence between more commercial charities and social enterprises emerging, along with businesses needing to become much more transparent and overtly purpose-led. So there's a kind of convergence driven by employees, driven by changes in business leadership practice, and driven by the market. People want to buy from ethical organizations that they can see are making a difference. So I don't have a personal issue with how that works. I mean, we're in a fortunate position that we're able to support some charities and different projects that we wouldn't have been able to do in the same sort of level. But for me, and certainly when Chloe and I've talked about it, we've always thought about it as a percentage. And so when the business, so as we kind of sort of came back to our faith, we didn't. This was before the business was particularly successful, and we didn't have lots of money. But we decided that there was a proportion of our money that we would then be giving to church and be giving to charity, and we stand by the same percentage now. Now it's a few more pounds than it was back then. But I think the answer for me is that. That percentages is the answer. And then if you have a lot, I guess it may feel like a lot if you're writing a check that's a big number. But for us, certainly that it would be the same percentage.
It's all relative.
It's all relative. So that's how we've gone about looking at things.
I love that approach. There is no right or wrong way to do it. I think the point is you do it. I remember a coach of mine many years ago. Telling me of a story of a client of his who he was, helping with his business and all that stuff. And he felt really guilty about making money. Right? This real issue with it. And the business was growing great guns. And he was able to kind of reframe it for him by saying, well, yeah, okay, you feel bad about it, you feel guilty, you feel like maybe you get too much and not enough people have got other people don't have enough. Well, there's only one way to deal with that. Well, you need to make it, right? If you want to help other people, you've got to make it first. It's okay. Give it all away. If that's what you're here to do, then that's what you should do. But you can't do that unless you make it first, because nobody's going to make it for you. And then nobody benefits. So there is a balance, right? The greed thing and some of the caricatures, and we've all met people like that who just don't care about anyone else. Right? And that's fine. That's up to them. I think if we can do it with purpose and do it the right way, look after our people, and then hopefully through our success help other people, then that's a decent model for society, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think it's how you go about doing it. The doing it itself is, I think you can get into a bit of a means justifying ends, which I think is a bit of a dangerous argument as well. But 100%, if you've not got the money to give away,
Yeah.
you can't help the people that you want to help.
No, absolutely.
So I think approaching the right way, and I do think there is a little bit of if I chatted to a friend who's incredibly successful, and he's now in Hong Kong, but he was moving over to New York. And he was sharing, he works in financial services, and he was talking about loving it when he came back to Scotland because he kept grounded, because there were people where it almost seemed, he was saying that the game was to be the richest person in the grave. So I think that it, taken to extreme, it's not clever, but but earned for the right reasons, then it gives you options to help lots of people.
Yeah, I always find that odd, the competitive nature of wealth generation, to have the biggest score. It seems kind of pointless.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I mean, other than I'm sure it's very enjoyable, but probably not fulfilling. I suspect, in my experience, anyway.
Well, I think that there's always a bigger house.
Yeah,
there's always the minute you've got. There's a natural inclination, if you're not careful, to want the next thing. So,
which is probably what you're going to, if you get into that cycle, and that's why having, again, this become quite a common theme. A purpose outside of what you do.
Yeah.
Right. It's like who you are, what you're about, what are your principles, what are your values, rather than I am Mr. whatever CEO, Mrs. CEO. That's what's important. If it's all wrapped up in that, then at some point, that stops.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it's too late.
It's all temporary, that stuff.
It is, absolutely. And how do you think with your, how do you approach this all with your children? Because you want to presumably have a positive influence in them over the piece.
Well, again, coming back to my dad, in fact, I think he said his dad said it to him, and you might not like this, Adrian, so forgive me for sharing it. You can edit, right. you can edit it out. You can edit it out later. But he said to me, son, if when your mum and I have passed away, you find there's any money left over, you'll know we miscalculated.
It's actually the best form of inheritance tax planning is to spend it.
So that's what we're saying. That's what we're saying to the kids. But certainly trying to help them understand that earning money is important, but it's not the most important thing. And starting to help them understand about saving and investing. I mean, they may pay about as much attention as I did, unfortunately, but hopefully just trying to get them an understanding of finding something. I think we talk often about what people want to do or what people want to be. What Chloe and I are trying to do is to talk to the kids about who they want to be.
Yeah.
Which changes the conversation, and hopefully their identities don't get wrapped up in, well, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be that's what you are. But more interested, well, who you are, and character being, they're their own people. They're 14 and nearly 17.
Right, okay. Yeah.
So they're very much their own people, but it's about how can we support them grow into who they aspire to become. And for me, that's more about character. And so when it comes to talking about, business and money, it's a case of, well, yes, that's important, but so that you can do things that are important to you, support things that are important, rather than being the thing.
Yeah, it's never about the money. Money's our understanding of money is relatively rudimentary. I think money is simply a utility to do the things that you want to do. It isn't the thing. Nobody wants to have, well, maybe some people do, but generally nobody wants to just have loads of money. You want to have an amount of money for a reason, to allow you to do something, or to support your family, or to live a dream, to travel the world, to whatever the thing might be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that. And I guess you've kind of touched on this. So the next stage for you, this other thing you might want to support, or things perhaps. How do you see that playing out? Maybe just is there a is there a milestone that you need to get to first before you do that, or is it just kind of seeing how things develop?
I think that there isn't a specific milestone. I think that getting really robust succession planning in place, however long that takes, so if that happened more quickly, that would really be the trigger. If that takes longer, then it takes longer. So that, if you likes the milestones rather than a timeline on that. And it's also about just creating the headspace to really think about, well, what is the next? What's the next thing? You know, how much risk do I want to take? And as maybe come through on a couple of the things we've touched on, I quite like pressure. And so I'm not a big risk taker, but taking a little bit of risk on whatever happens next, and building appropriate pressure will need to happen, and I'll need to feel comfortable that I'm leaving the day-to-day running of Livingston James, you know, in good hands, as I'm sure I will be, because that's the milestone.
Exactly. That's right. You're not going to do it otherwise, are you?
Before that happens, so that I can free up the time and the capacity. So it's kind of it's sort of conceptual rather than, you know, clear in terms of the space. I know the space I'm interested in, and at the moment I think that would be starting a business or buying or investing into maybe something that's already there. I don't know that I want to do the complete greenfield startup again.
I know that's having been there. You probably, it's nice to have all the learnings, but maybe don't want to. Just hands dirty every day. It's a couple of wee questions that hopefully help. It's interesting, but also always get wee really useful nuggets from everybody from their experience. Is there any piece of advice or wisdom that you've received over the years that you want to share that you think would be really useful?
Well, I think the one I mentioned about work out what you're good at and surround yourself with people that are good at the things you're not. It's really simple, but really, really good. And it stood me in the sort of stood the test of time for me, certainly. And maybe trying to have a mindset, and I think I'm a bit better at this now, that, you know, so often if I look at the things that look like they were most challenging, so, you know, just looking at the ones that we touched on, the you know, losing my job and COVID, you know, difficult times, and you know, and going into those situations, you're going, this is awful, but then, you know, just looking back and going, but it was always through those things and as a consequence of them that the really great stuff happened. So maybe my advice would be, you know, I'll try to take my own advice in the future when I'm sure these things happen. But is recognizing that when things look like they're going really wrong, that you know, I would believe there's a bigger plan at play, and it is very often those really challenging things that are going to be where the most growth comes from, personally, business, whatever that growth might mean.
You have to, I guess, you know, you have to have faith. Whatever shape that takes, that you're doing the right things.
Indeed.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jamie. We also have what we like to do is pose a question to each of our guests for the next guest.
Okay.
So I've got a wee question for you from it was from Ross Geddes of Finiston Clothing. So what does purpose mean to you?
What does purpose mean to me? Well, I've got. I suppose from a personal perspective, it would be built on a foundation of faith, and then that would look at love God and love your neighbour, and what do those things mean practically? So that would be a very personal answer to that. From a business point of view, after we did the buyout in 2019, we went through a really intentional purpose to work out exercise to work out what our company's purpose was, where we had everybody in the company together. I mean, we didn't do everybody all at once, but we asked people to come armed with examples of when they'd been most inspired to do their job. And we said, we want real stories, so we need to know people, we need to know exactly what happened. And then we sort of said, and we want you to have a statement that we're going to put you in a small group, and we want everyone's story to be captured, and we want, I did this, and this happened, and that's when I felt most inspired. And we need a statement. So we went through this where we're saying, right, and this is not a marketing thing. This is not going to be broadcast to the world. But we eventually managed to get a statement that captured the sentiment of everybody's story, which is, we're here to help people and organisations realise their potential so that together we can impact lives and communities for the better. And that captured everybody's story. So whether somebody was the office manager, whether someone had been, their piece might have been about promoting a colleague or developing someone's career, or a great bit of work they did for a client, or how they'd helped advise somebody's, on their career that had made a massive difference. And so that's our corporate purpose. And it was invaluable to have that articulated and everybody's input to it, because of course 4 months later we hit the pandemic and there wasn't going to be much recruitment. I mean, there's no recruitment mentioned in that purpose. So we were saying, well, how can we help people and organisations realise their potential so that we can impact lives and communities for the better right now? And so straight away the team were on to thinking about, right, how do we get groups together of our clients to work out how they're going to combat this? So it was a real galvanising force for us, and something that as a leader I could point to in terms of, well, I can set directions through our purpose regardless of the circumstances. Because there was probably at least a month when absolutely nobody was recruiting, and maybe was never going to recruit ever again. So it was really very, very useful to have that purpose, and for everybody in the business to know that their personal inspiring stories were part of it. And I think it allowed us to sort of navigate that storm far better than if we hadn't had it in place. So personal and corporate example for you.
It's great because that ties in. It's not, you didn't do it to them.
No.
And your purpose and their own individual purpose in life fed into that. So there's that connection between the two, the corporate brand, but that means something to me personally. So without that kind of, it's a bit hollow, isn't it? It doesn't really work.
I think so. It's about
all and stick on marketing stuff, and like it's not really meaningful.
Well, it was interesting because it was the feeling that people got, in terms of that. So when you feel most inspired, and what happened, what was this, and then going, right, okay, if we can get focused on that, that's when we're all going to be at our best.
Yeah.
As you say, if I had forced our purpose, and it's really quite interesting because you can tell quite often with organisations where it's been an exercise that's been, and I remember having this conversation with our board. There was is this a marketing thing or is it an HR thing? Yeah. And I said, well, actually, it sits above all of it. And when we talk about how we make decisions, we've got a kind of pyramid where purpose is the sort of true north, and then we've got our values, which are our behaviours around how we're going to do it. So those things are kind of set in stone. And then we'll have some long-term goals that might be financial or whatever they might be. And then you've kind of got strategy that then is about how you're going to go about doing those things. But I certainly think increasingly when we are assessing leaders now, people that major on purpose are more successful than those that major on strategy. Because you've got to be good. You've got to kind of be good at both. But because the pace of change is so fast, firmly held strategic decision making can get you into as much trouble as it can lead you to success. Whereas if you get the right purpose, so when we're assessing leaders now, it's kind of to the fore, and it felt, entirely appropriate to make sure that we as a business were kind of walking the walk on that. In fact, it would have been foolish for us not to, because we were assessing the leaders and seeing that that's what works.
I know, but that's not for us.
We'll ignore that. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much. What question would you like to leave for our next guest?
So if you had your time again, what would you do differently?
Brilliant. Where can people find more about the business then?
So livingstonjamesgroup.com would then give you a link to both Livingston James and rutherfordcross.com for those two businesses, and we're on under those names, LinkedIn, Instagram. I think some of our young people use. I can't qualify the content on that. So I'd say LinkedIn and the websites are the way to go.
Brilliant. That's been great, Jamie. Thank you for that. Really great conversation.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Thanks, Adrian.